Well, good morning. Happy Labor Day weekend. All right, a few guys are excited about Labor Day. Listen, some people are on vacation. You know, we're all here, and I'm glad you're here. We have some visitors who are on vacation, so that's awesome. And so glad to see everyone today. It reminds me of another holiday that passed that we didn't really get to celebrate because we got shut down by COVID, which is the 4th of July, right? So maybe you guys stayed home because we were forced to. But my uncle had a tradition of always celebrating the 4th of July when I was growing up. And so he would invite all the aunts and uncles and cousins. It was his holiday. You know, like we all have our own holiday in our family. Somebody does Thanksgiving, somebody does Christmas. Well, his was the 4th of July. And he lived on Cedar Lake in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And so it was a great setting because it was on the lake, you know, there was paddle boats, there was canoes, sailboat, you know, you could go fishing off the docks, you could just kind of hang out in the sun, you could go swimming, you could do whatever you wanted. So it was a great location. Of course, we had a picnic and everybody's in the backyard. Backyard led right onto the lake, you know, it was just beautiful, great place. And so one day, this particular 4th of July, my cousin Steve was lighting off bottle rockets, okay? Now, actually, they're illegal in Massachusetts, but he had a bag, in a brown paper bag, and he's sitting on a lawn chair, and he's lighting them off. And it's actually daylight out, okay? But you know what a bottle rocket, if you're not familiar, looks like this right here. So he's holding the back end of one. He would light it from his hand and just shoot it off over the lake. Now, there was a guy on the other side of the lake, and he's lighting them off, and they're going to shoot them at each other, even though it's so far away, you'd never hit them anyway. And we're yelling across the lake, and they're yelling back, and we're just enjoying the fun, right? We're enjoying the spectacle that's happening in front of us. And then my uncle kind of describes it like this, because he was standing out on the dock at the time, so they're going over his head, but as he's walking back, he looks and he sees Steve, and he describes it like this: all I saw was a red, bright glow coming from his lap in the brown bag. All of a sudden, rockets started shooting everywhere. He was holding them, the sparks must have hit the bag, hit the things. He starts shooting. I mean, he falls over in his chair. He throws the bag. I mean, he's scrambling to get out of the way. The bottle rockets are whistling because they were whistlers. They're bouncing off the house, bouncing off trees. People are diving for cover. Little kids are crying. Old ladies are screaming. I mean, it was like the sky was just filled, you know. And he gets up and he just throws the bag. He runs, and we'll never forget that day. It even left a burnt spot on the lawn for like a year, you know, because it took forever for the grass to go back. It was one of those things that was so memorable you just couldn't forget, you know. And luckily, nobody, not a single person, got hit by one of these bottle rockets, which was amazing. But it was an amazing time. It was something interesting to see. Nothing you would ever try to structure yourself, right? Kids don't do this at home. It just happened to happen. And Steve was sitting there. I mean, think about it, with this bag full of fireworks, with this potentially dangerous stuff in his lap. This bag of explosives, you know, had the power to really hurt him if you think about it. I mean, one could have just hit him right in the eye or in the face or blew up right there. I mean, he could have gotten really injured, but thank God he didn't do that. But especially because he was holding on to the bag, right? He's holding on to it. And have you ever held on to something too long? Maybe a little bit too long, right? Until the point where it kind of became dangerous. It could have been an object or a possession that you really thought you should hold on to. I remember I've had things that I've kept for too long when I should have sold them earlier. Like I have a little story about a car that I kept for way too long, right? And then it was worth nothing and it was a big mess. But you know, there could be something like a relationship that you let drag out, you kept dragging it out, and you keep thinking, well, it'll change or something. But you kept holding on to it, and then eventually it didn't turn out so good. Or maybe it was a past hurt that you never got over. You just kept holding on to it, and it was like this unforgiveness that you had towards somebody, maybe in your family, for a word that they said or a thing that they did, and every time you see them, they're wondering why you have an attitude, right? And you still have that attitude, but you won't tell them what it is. Or maybe it's just something like a bad habit that you have, you just can't get rid of it, or some other thing that we're obsessed over. We just get obsessed over things. You ever have that happen in your life and you just can't let it go? But each one of us, in some way, we've probably held on to something too long. Maybe it was the wrong relationship, or maybe it was the wrong dream. You kept thinking, I'm going to achieve this, and it was something you thought you were going to do, but never achieved it. Or maybe it was the wrong position somewhere, or maybe it was that bad habit that you kept holding on to. Because sometimes we can hold on to stuff that's really dangerous for us. And probably every one of us has experienced that at some point. But the thing about something that we hold on to that's dangerous like that we keep holding on to, is that it distracts us from what God really has for us. And it ends up taking things from us because we get so focused on it, we can't get out of it. And like my cousin Steve, it may eventually bring pain into our lives or potentially hurt us in some way. But there is hope. There's hope for every one of us because we can learn to recognize those things that are potentially dangerous and actually eliminate them from our lives. Now, we're in the series Courageous, Find the Strength to Do the Impossible. So it's a study through the book of Esther. And if you're familiar with it all, that book, it's in the Old Testament. It takes place about 500 years before Jesus walked the earth. But it's about this girl, and she's a Jewish orphan girl. And at that time, she lived in the Persian Empire. You see, her people, the Jews, were taken captive and dispersed throughout this kingdom. They don't even have their own homeland. And this is the setting for where she lives. And through this strange twist of fate, or God's providence, she becomes queen of the empire. She goes from poor Jewish refugee, right, orphaned refugee, to queen of the world. You know, it's an amazing story. And if you haven't caught up or you've been listening to it just now, you're saying, hey, I'd like to know more of the backstory, you can listen to it on our website or on YouTube on Faith Generation and check it out. But one day, she becomes queen. Her uncle, Mordecai, he's trying to keep his Jewish traditions. He's in the king's gate, and this guy, who's the prime minister, basically, he's the second in command to the king. Everyone's supposed to bow down and pay homage to him, but because he's a Jew, he can't do that. I don't worship other things. I don't bow down to other things except God, so he refuses to do it. And this just drives Haman crazy. That's the prime minister's name. He's infuriated because this guy won't give him the attention that he thinks he deserves. And so he convinces the king. Haman goes to the king and says, look, there's this group of people, they're kind of rebellious against you. They're called the Jews. And so can we just wipe them out? And the king says yes. And Haman says, I'll pay you some money. And so they pick this day where everybody is allowed to fight their Jewish neighborhood and defeat them, kill them, and take all that they have. So, I mean, you're like, whoa, what happened here? This is not good, right? This is a really serious issue. And it was. And so there's only one problem, there's nobody there to defend themselves because they're refugees. And so Mordecai, the uncle, says to Esther, who's the queen, you got to do something. You're like our only hope. You've got to go to the king and tell him what's going on and try to reverse this thing somehow to save the Jewish people. And so Esther goes, well, I'll do that, but there's just this one problem. No one's allowed to walk in front of the king, go into the king's courtroom unless he lets you. And I haven't even spoken to him in 30 days. I don't even know if he still likes me anymore. Because if we go back all the way to chapter 1, he got rid of his old queen, right? So she's like, maybe I'm in jeopardy. So she's nervous. There's this problem. So he says, listen, if I go in front of him and he doesn't accept this, he doesn't point his scepter in my direction, then I'm dead. So let's do this. I'm going to fast for 3 days with my maidservants, and I want you, Uncle Mordecai, to take all the people in the capital of Shushan and all the Jewish people and fast for me for 3 days. And so they do that, and that's where we pick up the story right now. So now it happened on the third day. You're one forward. Did I have that in the wrong order? Okay, I'll read it to you. It's in your outline, though. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house. And while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that it was in his hand. So she shows up in the courtroom. She doesn't know what's going to happen. The king sees her, and he happens to be a good day, and he says, okay, he points the scepter. And so she's able to go over there, and she touches the scepter. So then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. I mean, it's such a gracious thing to say, up to half the kingdom. So he's very happy. And so Esther answers, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. And then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. I mean, he is in a great mood. And so she says, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. I mean, the king accepts her in there. He's having a great day. He's happy. He finds out there's a banquet. Quickly gets Haman. Let's go hang out at this banquet. And so he does. And then she invites him. And now I guess in that moment, in the middle of the courtroom, you would think, why didn't she just ask right then? I guess maybe she's trying to butter him up, I guess, or she's not sure what his reaction will be, or it might be weird to just cause the scene. Oh, king, my people are going to die right there in that moment. So she's like, I'm going to take him separately, and I'm going to talk to him. And so that's what she does. And so Haman, though, man, this guy is excited to be there. It's an exclusive banquet with just him and the queen. I mean, think about it. If you were invited to something like that, you would be very excited too. It's like just me, the president, Trump and Melania. I don't know if you like them or not, but whatever. The president is there. I don't know if you're fans of the previous president. Maybe it was him, right? You're there and you're just like, it's just us. How amazing is that? It was everything that Haman wanted. But Haman needs to watch out because he's going to learn this lesson. It's the first fill-in in your outline. So if you have that, pull it out. You can follow along in the notes. But it's this. Just because you want something doesn't make it good for you. Just because you want something doesn't make it good for you. Now, we kind of already know that, right? Because we've already learned that when we were a kid, didn't you? You learned that at a very early age. My daughter Gwendolyn loves candy. This girl has a sweet tooth. And when she was really little, she would stash away candy in different little places so that she could eat it throughout the day. In fact, if we didn't find those stashes, that's all she would do is eat candy. She wouldn't eat the things that are healthy for us. But every child learned the same thing. Every one of us sitting here probably learned the same thing, and that is you can't just eat candy or you won't get the nutrients you need, right? You have to have some vegetables. If all of us okay? But that's what we learned. We don't like the vegetables, but we need them. We love the candy, but it's not necessarily good for us. And if you eat only candy, it may turn out bad for you. But even though we know this, we tend to rate things in our lives. If you think about it, we tend to rate the things in our lives by how much we like them, right? We're not going to do the things we don't want to do. We're only going to do the things we like. We're not going to go after the things that are not make us happy. We're only going to go for the stuff that makes us happy. If we like it, we'll go for it sometimes even when it's bad for us. Even when it's bad. But the sense of pleasure does not always mean it's going to be helpful in your life. This is what's happening to Haman right now. What Haman wanted more than anything was recognition. He wants respect. He wants glory. He wants adoration. His very name means magnificent, okay? And that's what he thought of himself. I am magnificent, and everybody else has to know I'm magnificent too. So imagine he's getting invited to this thing. It only feeds his ego. He's like, yes, this is it. He wants recognition. In fact, he's obsessed with it, and he lives for it, and it becomes his idol. Now, what's an idol? Biblically, an idol was an object of worship other than God. It was something else. It was usually a statue or representation of a type of God. And there were many gods at that time that Esther walked the earth. The Phoenicians had gods. They had gods like Baal and Dagon. He was like a half fish, half man. The Egyptians had gods. Probably some of you guys have heard of them. The Ra and Anubis and Isis. Even the Greeks had gods like Zeus and Ares and Poseidon. And even the Romans had gods like Saturn and Jupiter and even Vulcan. That's not just a Star Trek term. That was a god. I didn't know that. It's like, that's pretty interesting. But the thing was, all these gods existed at that time, and they would have these little statues. Sometimes they would carry them around with them, or sometimes they had them in their houses. And so these were called an idol. And they would bow down, they would worship him. But this is what the Bible says about idols. Listen to this. It's pretty interesting. The idols of the nations are silver and gold made by human hands. And they have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but can't see. They have ears but cannot hear, nor is there any breath in their mouths. And those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. Like, they can't do anything. It's so ironic that they actually made them themselves, right? I made this God by myself, and I'm expecting that there's some kind of superpower behind it. Well, an idol for you and I is just something that we obsess over. You know, something that we obsess over that ultimately, just like these idols, had no power behind them. They couldn't do anything to help their lives. It couldn't prosper them. They still worship them. It's something that we do too. We obsess over them. Haman is obsessing over devotion and attention. And it takes away our focus from God. And there are many things that become an idol in your and my life. There's many things. Drugs and alcohol is one of the obvious one, right? Because it becomes a mechanism by which we try to cope. It becomes a God when we need help. And eventually we find some type of solace, but it doesn't ultimately solve our problem. We all know this. Relationships that become our identity, not a relationship in and of itself, but if we define ourselves by that relationship, then it's going to become an idol in our life. I have someone who's very near to me, and every time they date a man, it always becomes about them and that person. Them and that person. I can hear it in their language because their identity is wrapped up in that relationship. Or love of money or power or possessions, not having those things, but the love of it. The insatiable love for having those things. Or vengeance and unforgiveness in our hearts. Sometimes we hold on to these harmful emotions that we just can't let go of. Or even sometimes it's a hurt or a tragedy that we've had in the past that we just keep carrying forward. We won't move on from it. We won't move on, and we keep carrying it forward in our lives. And these things become idols for us. You know, one of my idols when I was young was this, that my family situation was pretty rough, and I was kind of passed on to live with my grandparents, and when I was a very young age, and I always felt like people would say like, oh, they have to take care of you. You're like a burden to them. And so inside, I made this agreement with myself that I was never going to let other people, I would never have to depend on them. And my form of living that out was I had to know everything. I never was going to ask somebody a question about how to do something. And later in life, I realized how deeply this had gotten into my life when I had a barbecue with some friends after it was a little bit after I had graduated from high school. And at the time, we had a new barbecue grill, and it had lava rocks in it. And I'd never used a barbecue hardly at all, never mind one with gas. And so they asked me, hey, can you turn this on? How does this work? And I said, what you do is you let those lava rocks get hot. Here I am just like making this up. And once it gets hot enough, just turn it off. And so we put these shrimp skewers on this grill, and shrimp cooks in like 2 seconds. But because we had turned it off, like we pull them off, and everybody's trying to eat this shrimp. I don't know if you ever had raw shrimp. That's gross, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, I look like a fool right now. I'm looking like a fool because I couldn't let go of the idol that I had to know everything. It was one of those wake-up calls for me in my life, and who knows what it is for you. You know, what is the idols that we hold on to that we won't let go of, that we like, this is who I am, this is what I have to be. And because we're holding on to it so hard, it's becoming a problem. The party for Haman becomes a picture for you and me of not all things are good for us. He wants this party really bad, but what he doesn't realize is this party is really a bad thing for him. Because if you know the story, eventually Esther's going to tell on him at the party, right? And everything's going to come crashing down. But because he loves it so much, he loves the recognition, that's all he can see. He doesn't even see the danger in it. And that's what happens with you and me often when it comes to that. This is the beginning of the end for Haman right now. He just doesn't really know it yet. And his obsession is what causes all the problems in this story. The whole book of Esther is because of this one man's obsession for recognition. That everything, this story is even written the way it is. And if he doesn't let it go, it's going to destroy him. So let's continue to check it out. So it says this, so Haman went out that day, so he leaves the party, and he's joyful with a glad heart. And when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. So he leaves. He's like on cloud 9. I mean, just think about this. This guy's he's heading home. He's probably singing to himself, right? He leaves. He's like, oh man, this is a great day. Everybody have one of those days, right? You're just like, you're skipping and everything. And on the way out of the gate, he's going home. He's going out the castle. He's out of the castle. He goes through the gate and he sees this one guy. Everybody stands up to recognize him, but Mordecai's like, nope, not going to do it. Just sitting down, and he sees him and he just goes, it infuriates him. Like, what is wrong with this guy? Doesn't he know I just had a private dinner with the king and queen? Doesn't he know how powerful I am? I mean, doesn't this guy get it? He doesn't even see it. This guy's driving me nuts. He's looking and he's seeing this guy, and it's all he can think of. I mean, he's just probably had one of the best days of his life, but it's all he can think of. So his perfect day gets blown because of his obsession, this one thing. This guy won't bow down to me. He won't give me recognition. And now he's upset. It's ruined. His joy is gone, all because of one man. And that's the second lesson that Haman begins to learn, or we learn from him, and that's this. Any obsession in your life will steal your joy. any obsession in your life will eventually or ultimately steal your joy. The problem with an obsession is that instead of energizing you, it actually consumes you. Think about it. It becomes the thing that you spend all your time trying to attain. All of your energy goes after this one thing. And even if you get it and attain it, then you try to hold on to it, right? You struggle to hold on to it. Haman is the prime minister of the known world at this time, but it's not enough for him. He's actually got it, but he's trying to hold on to it. He's trying to hold on more. When I was growing up, we lived next door to a family whose last name was Body, like our bodies, right? That was their last name, Body. And there was two girls, they had two girls, and I was very young, elementary school, and so we would spend the summers hanging out. And it was three boys, it was me, and I have two older brothers, Lee and Michael, and their names were Florence and Rosemary. And so we would spend days outside, they had a pool, we would hang out with them, we'd hang out in the basements, and girls, I don't know, they always like to put on shows. Guys don't care about that, but if you wanted to play together, they wanted us to sing and put on little shows, so you can only imagine. I don't have any video. And if I did, I wouldn't show you it. But this one day, we weren't doing singing and dancing and shows, but instead we decided to play board games, okay? But I wanted to play a particular board game, and I got up and I was like, okay, we're going to put a vote to it. There's like 6 people here, right? So we're going to put a vote to it. I wanted this one so bad, and I'm like, we're going to play this one. No, the vote didn't come out right. And I got mad, and I started yelling, I started screaming, I threw a fit, I was even crying. And then I stormed out of there, because every time I'd done that in the past, people were going to have pity on me and they're going to come follow me, but they didn't. And I walked up the stairway, I went outside, and I was sat on the bulkhead, which is the outdoor stairway, and I just sat there. And I'm thinking, they're going to come any minute, and I'm so mad, and they're going to feel bad for me. And like 10 minutes went by, 15 minutes went by, half an hour went by, an hour went by, 2 hours went by. That's how stubborn I am. And they finally, Florence comes out. Florence walks up, and she goes, listen, I'm like, now it's going to come. Here's the apology. This is what I'm thinking, right? They're going to beg me to come back in there. And she comes over and she goes, hey, listen, we played the games and we had a great time. I'm sorry you didn't make it. But I just wanted to come and see if you were okay. And I'm like, well, I wanted to play this game, you know. And she's like, listen, sometimes you don't get your way. Sometimes you don't get your way. And you throwing a fit is not going to make a difference. And I learned a valuable lesson that day. You don't always get your way. You know, if you're always trying to push your way and you, without budging, you're going to live a lonely existence. Sometimes it's going to alienate you from other people, but it's definitely going to alienate you from God and what God has for you in your life. You're going to miss out, especially when it comes to God. Listen to what Paul says to the church. So they are darkened, these people that are obsessed, are darkened in their understanding and alienated from the life of God. They're so darkened, they're alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of their hearts. And that's what the obsession does with us. We get so obsessed, we get hardened in our hearts, and it alienates us from the life of God. That's what idols do in our lives. And the thing you're obsessing over right now, whatever it may be, whether it's small or great, is pushing you away from others and the life that God has for you. You know, it's even the small things that push us away. You know, when I do something wrong with my wife, I can sit there and I can just say, you know, but I had a right to do this or not, and we get so stuck in our ways, and yet it's going to alienate her. It's going to alienate us from the life that we're seeking. Idols consume you instead of you being consumed by God. And they harden our hearts so that we focus on this one thing, and you won't be able to pursue what God has for you because you're focused somewhere else. The root of obsession is really not found in God. The root of obsession is a need for fulfillment. And so what we think is going to bring us joy, that's the thing that we push toward. The thing that we think is going to bring us fulfillment, that's what we try to attain. But those things in life were never meant to satisfy us. I put this in your outline so you might remember it. But it's not the things of this world that bring enjoyment to your life. It's God in your life that brings enjoyment to the things of this world. Does that make sense? I'm going to read it again. It's not the things of this world that bring enjoyment to your life. It's God in your life that brings enjoyment to the things of this world. You see, we try to get the right relationship, the right things, the right money, the right power, the right house, whatever it is, and we think that's going to bring us the joy. But it's when we draw close to God that He allows us to enjoy the things that we have. And that's where true enjoyment comes from. Mordecai wants recognition so bad in this situation that even though he's had this amazing day, right? I mean, all of us would be like, it can't get much better than this, right? How can it get any better than this? And it's destroyed because of one small fly in the ointment. And he can't enjoy all the great things that are in his life. And so this is how it kind of concludes, is this. And then Haman told them, remember he invites his friends and his wife over to his house, some of the great riches, okay, he tells them of his great riches, and the multitude of his children, and everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am invited by her again, along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. And in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and so he had a gallows made. Haman came home obsessed. He calls all his friends, and he does what you and I do, right, when we get upset, right? We start telling all our friends all our issues. He's like, but he's bragging. He's like, look, I've got all this stuff, and yet he just can't let go. He's talking to his friends, hoping they're going to give him some consolation, but he can't let go. And that's the problem with the obsessions and idols in our lives. There comes a point where we go so deep that we can't let go, And then this is, or to put it another way, it's in your outline, the thing that you can't let go eventually won't let go of you. See, Haman's getting to a point, he can't let it go. But now it's getting a hold of him. Haman has everything that a person can want. We'll find out later in the story he has 10 boys, 10 men, 10 children, right? 10 guys. That means your legacy is going to live on really good, right? He's got incredible wealth. He's only second in power to the king. He's invited to this private banquet. He's got it all, but he's not satisfied. He believes that he has to have this one thing. This one guy has to bow down. And it's so insignificant when you think about it, right? Mordecai not recognizing really one man in all the kingdom, not like giving you glory. And it's going to ruin this one insignificant thing, ruins all the significance that he does have. Right? I just listed all these great things that I have in my life. But this one little thing is ruining everything. And that's what our idols, that's what our obsession does. It ruins all the stuff that we already have. So he defined his success, his significance by this one insignificant thing, and it becomes the thing that he can't live without. I can't live without Mordecai not bowing down. And so he's going to get rid of him. That's the advice of his friends. And so they build this big gallows, and back then they're not sure if it was actually you hang him or it was a pole. And 50 cubits, by the way, was like 75 feet tall. So this building is maybe 30, so about almost, easily double this. That's how high he wants to hang Mordecai. So everybody can see that this is what happens when you don't bow down to me. You see, I still win in the end. That's what he's thinking, right? But the problem is he can't let go at this point. He's become so obsessed that it becomes his undoing. This is the very thing that becomes his undoing. Farmers and hunters in third world countries, they have been trapping monkeys for centuries. And the way they would do it, if you wanted to capture a live monkey, instead of like hitting it with a bow and arrow or shooting it or whatever, is that you would take an object like a gourd or a jar, or even they used termite hills back then because they got so hard, and they would cut a hole just big enough for a monkey's hand. And then in that jar or that gourd or whatever, they put something sweet like nuts or some fruit, and then they would wait and set it somewhere where the monkeys would come. And then the monkey would come up there and he would stick his hand in to get the fruit or to get whatever it is. But there was a problem because when he tried to pull out his hand, it wasn't big enough to pull out his hand when it was full. But the monkey was so obsessed with holding on to what it was, he wouldn't let go. So the farmers or the tribal people, all they had to do was walk right up to him. And if the gourd was tied to a knot, whatever, a rope, he would just pick up the monkey because he couldn't let go. He'd go screaming and yelling. He'd act like crazy. You could watch videos of it, and he'd go nuts, because he couldn't let go of what was in his hand. And so he was caught, and ultimately he was easily grabbed. If they had just surrendered, think about it, what they were holding on to, if they had just surrendered, they would be free. But instead, because they can't let go, they're trapped by it. There are times that we hold on to something because we want it so bad. And I don't know what's happened in your life, but sometimes we hold on to it and we get a tighter and tighter grip. In fact, we have moments, instead of just talking to our friends, we're sometimes going over it in our heads, aren't we? We're doing what Haman was doing in the back room somewhere, pacing back and forth because we're so obsessed with whatever it is we're trying to get. And we're hanging on to every moment, every dollar sign to see if it's fluctuating, or we're watching to see if that relationship is working out, or we're holding on, and we're just becoming obsessed. It's destroying our peace, and it's destroying us from pursuing what God has in our lives. And we fail to realize that what we're holding on to now has a grip on us. There's a point where something starts to hold on to you. Just like the monkey, you're not in control anymore. You know, sin doesn't want to let you go. Sin wants to hold on to you. And that's what it becomes when the idols come into our lives. They eventually become sin because we're missing our mark with God, and we just can't seem to get back to where we want to. The Bible tells us this, that be self-controlled and alert. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion for someone, seeking someone to devour. And that's what obsession in our life is. Satan's just looking and waiting for you to get tied up, to not let go, so that he can devour you. Mordecai's undoing was his need for accolades and recognition. I mean, he has so many things. He's got so much, but he becomes obsessed over this one thing, this hatred for one person, and he can't let it go. Sometimes we have that in our lives. We can't forgive because we forgive. We just let them off the hook, right? How can we just let them off the hook? I mean, they need to feel what I felt. They need to feel the pain that I went through, and so I don't want to let it go. Or maybe the drugs that we use to cope with the world. And if we have anybody, and probably every one of us knows somebody, there's a point where they're enjoying it and it's helping them, and then there comes a point where it takes over in their life, and then they can't let it go, and they become addicted. There's so many things in our lives that happen like that. And what we thought eventually would be freedom actually becomes the confinement. From this point on in the story, Mordecai has less than 36 hours to live. If you don't know the story, we're going to learn about it next week. But that's all he has left, because he became trapped by his obsession with Mordecai. And we look on at Mordecai, we're probably saying, Mordecai, stop. Stop right now. Don't go to the next party. Mordecai, don't build that gallows. Don't do those things, because it's your doom. And we would say that to anyone we see, but sometimes we don't do it in our own lives. We don't recognize it in our own lives when we're holding on to something. Mordecai doesn't even know that this is going to blow up in his face. My cousin Steve, although he should have understood that it was dangerous, and all of us should understand it's dangerous, he's still lighting off the bottle rockets, and they go off right in his lap. And if he's not careful, and if we're not careful, then what it is that we're holding on to is going to blow up in our lap. But God doesn't want that for you. It doesn't have to be that way for us. If we're brave enough to admit it to ourselves and say, listen, this thing I've been holding on to, I just need to let it go. I got to let go of my pride. I got to let go of my hate. I got to let go of my obsession. I got to let go of this desire for whatever it is. And if I can let it go, God's going to do something great in your life. God will replace that thing. He'll replace it with something better in your life. We have the opportunity to let it go before it goes off, before it destroys us, before it steals your peace, and before it ruins your life. And if you do, God will be there, and God will give you what you truly want, which is fulfillment and peace in your life. Let's pray. God, I thank you for everyone that's here today, and Lord, I don't know what we're holding on to. The truth is, maybe we've gotten rid of a lot of the big things in our lives, but there's still some small things maybe that we haven't even recognized. Help us to understand, Lord, the things that we just need to let go of, that they're only going to do harm to us. Help us to move on. Help us, Lord, for healing. Help us, Lord, where we need comfort, where we need your direction. God, that we might find ourselves on the path that leads to you in true fulfillment in our lives. Listen, if we'll all just keep an attitude of prayer for a moment. I just want to invite you today, if you've never made a decision to follow Jesus, let me just explain what that means. Really, we just invite him into our hearts because we've done so many different things in our lives, and many of us maybe, as I was talking about obsessions in our lives, I had some of those. And we understand that we've kind of blown it when it comes to God. Those things, those sins, the things that we've done wrong that don't please him have separated us from him. But he came to die on a cross to pay for every sin for you and me, so that he could pay for your sins and take on your unrighteousness and give you his righteousness. And therefore, it's not something you can earn, but you simply receive when you invite him into your life. And so that's all I want to do is lead you in a prayer to help you invite Jesus into your life so that you can be renewed and you can be with God forever because he loves you and he wants to be with you. So if that's you today, just repeat after me. Lord God, I open my heart. I invite you inside to be my God, my Savior, and my friend. Forgive me of my sins. Wash me clean. I've decided today to follow you, Jesus, from this day forever. I'm yours. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Can we clap for a minute?